As a lot of you know, I picked up this 300ZX shell and I'm putting a very unique swap in it. I'll show you how far I've gotten. Oh, you thought you were gonna see a motor. Nope, we're gonna have to go put that together. So over here we have the KA24, as you guys know. I pulled this out of an S13 in a junkyard. And I also picked up this adapter plate that you can use to make the 300ZX transmission to the KA. Now with this adapter plate, you will be able to run the stock KA clutch. So I have a new clutch here ready to go. And also we're gonna have to make some modifications on the transmission itself. So let's go grab the transmission and see what we are working with. Where's the transmission, you ask? Well, some of you might remember. It's riding shotgun. That's me. Dang it. Nate and I just carried this transmission over here. We were looking at not only the transmission but this engine as well, and we're like, dang, this thing is gunked up. Oh my gosh, it's just full of gunk. 30 years. I bet this engine has never been cleaned. We wanted to pressure wash it and clean it off. We reeled out the hose. It was so frozen that the hose ripped and there wasn't even water coming out of it because it's still 30 degrees outside. So unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to hose this down right now. But that's okay because we're just trying to get it running. We're not trying to make it look nice. We're gonna take off this auto plate because I actually cannot run this with this adapter. And then we're gonna read the directions and see how to put it on. I decided that the rear end of this motor is a little bit too gunked up to be putting a very nice plate on there, especially if I don't plan to take that plate off again. I'm gonna just use some brake clean to clean up some of these edges, and then also I have some degreaser. I'm gonna spray along here as well. And these bottom brackets too. Because if I'm not gonna have the opportunity to see these in a very long time, I might as well clean them up now. But like the side of the block and the front, I can clean all of that up later. You know what I mean? This is just caked on here. It's not even coming off, but the rag is completely black. Got the back of the engine very nicely cleaned up. Good enough for now. All of our points are nice and dry. No grime or grease on them. I just remembered I'm gonna have to clean out the inside of the transmission now. This is really nasty too. I think we can all agree that this looks much better. It's not perfect, but that's okay. We used what we had. I used my only 2 cans of brake clean and the rest of Nate's shop towels, so I'm gonna have to restock those for him. Now we're good to finally test mount this plate. It should just go on the back here. I'm already hitting the coolant hose. I'm gonna have to probably relocate that. So this dowel pin is a little too tight. It's not even pressing onto this adapter plate at all. So we're probably gonna sand it down just a little bit so it slides on a little smoother. So I don't want to damage this plate or the pin. In the grand scheme of things, I would much rather sand down a dowel pin than sand down this plate, because you can always just buy another dowel pin, but if you mess up drilling out the plate, you need to buy a whole other plate. Maybe it was just a little bit too much surface rust that was holding it up. And I'm also gonna have to take off this coolant hose for now. We're gonna have to figure out what hose I can use later on, because I do want to have heat in the Z. Now that I need some tools, we have the work truck here that has everything that I need. Always coming in clutch. There is one tool that I forgot to bring, the little micrometer. So we're gonna have to make a tool trip, not a parts trip, because we have to make sure that we get these measurements correct. It's very specific in the directions of how far this dowel pin is to stick out. Same with this one. And then we also have to bore out these 2 holes to fit bigger bolts. So which car should we take? I don't think we drove Nate's RSX Type S on the channel yet. And he also just put this wing on here.
Yeah, we're gonna find it.
I like the one with the screen on it. Also picked up some towels since I used all of his shop rags. Thanks for the ride, dude.
Well, hell yeah, man.
Hey, you got the new sticker in here?
Hell yeah, just chilling.
We dropped some new stickers. Just left it all out here like this. It's nice that you don't have to worry about people coming by and grabbing your stuff when you're this far out in the boonies. So these are the two lower bolt holes that we're gonna drill through. It fits in here already, but I do want to expand it to the correct dimension that it is calling for. All right, we have our lower holes drilled out to 13 millimeters. Now we need to find this dowel pin right here, and we need to trim it down to 6 millimeters. We'll take our measuring device and, oh, it looks like we don't have to trim very much off, but it's nice to check how far 6 millimeters is before grinding. 6. We are finally at the stage where we can start bolting things together. In this case, we're using these little flathead bolts to mount the plate to the engine. But before we put these in, we have to use thread locker. All the bolts are tightened by hand. I wanted to do that first so that the plate would kind of even itself, since these are like beveled. So we have the trans adapter plate fully mounted onto the engine and torqued down. The very next steps are to inspect the new flywheel. So I've taken apart the clutch disc from the flywheel. It says that there needs to be a bevel grinded into the opposite side of the teeth, since the starter is going to be engaging on the opposite side now. But luckily this flywheel is actually beveled on both sides, so we don't need to do that step, which is great because I did not feel like grinding my flywheel teeth all the way around. The very next step is to verify that the flywheel spacer fits onto the crank. And some automatic crankshafts have this little spacer on it, and since this came out of an automatic S13, it looks like we have a little spacer gapped out. So this should slide on there flush, but we have that much of a gap. The stub is now flat on the crank, but this still does not slide on there. And I'm noticing that this has a little indent in it as well. I don't know if this is the pilot bushing or if this is like the new race for the pilot bushing, but either way, it's hitting right here. So this has to come out completely. I don't know how we can grind more of that. I can't tell if this little bevel in here is connected to the inside or if this can be pulled out. I've never had to do something like this, doing an auto to manual swap, so this is kind of new to me. Never come across this issue before. Our next step is to find a pilot bearing puller and see if we can just get this pulled out somehow. Honestly, I have no other ideas of how I would remove that from the rear end of this crank. We made it back. We have the tool, but we did move everything into the garage because the sun is about to set and it's getting really cold out here. Well, unfortunately, using the pilot bearing puller made no difference. It did not even budge, though it did groove the inside of it. But I decided to look at the spacer again and see what was going on and see if I can move this pilot bearing on the inside here. And after some hammering, I was able to move the pilot bushing forward a little bit more. So I'm wondering if this is now a normal operation for the pilot bearing to be pushed out this far. It doesn't really fit on there very nicely. It's a really tight fit and it's almost too tight. Very lightly dremeled out the inside of this. See if it slides on now. It's still pretty tough. Oh, we got it. Before I put any nuts and bolts in this thing, I really do want to line up the transmission onto the bell housing to see if this is going to work. Because remember, I pushed out this pilot bushing farther than it was originally. So I don't know if that is going to be too far out or if I'm gonna need to make an adjustment with this pilot bushing. All right, I got the transmission lined up, but I ended up taking off the spacer again because I wanted to verify that this pilot bushing actually slides onto the input shaft, and it does. So now when I put this back onto the crank, I'm gonna put one bolt in. It's not gonna be bottomed out or tightened. This is just simply to hold it in place. I did some thinking about the operations of how I wanted to go about this because this is a very crucial piece to the build. You know, this is the inside. You have to take off the trans, the clutch. Yeah, a lot of work has to go in to get to this point if something goes wrong. So I wanted to make sure I do this right. And when we test fitted the transmission would bottom out on this adapter and the pilot bushing before it would even touch the plate. So I knew I would either have to adjust the pilot bushing or trim the pilot bushing. And I really did not want to trim the pilot bushing. So I decided to take another crack at taking out that automatic pilot bushing, and I got it out. Woo! But you're not gonna believe how I got it out. I tried using this tool a couple more times and it kept slipping off of the edge. So I actually had to grind down the very tips of this so they'd be sharper and it would have a stronger grab on this pilot bushing. Because now I can put this pilot bushing back into the spacer at the correct depth this time, because I took it out, took some measurements. Sometimes you gotta just look at everything, weigh out your options. I just pressed the pilot bushing back into the flywheel spacer. So I'm gonna mount this on here again, just one bolt. Again, we're just trying to hold it in place. I'm gonna test for the transmission. Up. Yo, it looks good. Whoa. We're getting ready to put the flywheel on, and these come with some grease when they ship them. That's just so they don't surface rust. So you gotta spray it off. Nice little rag. Now it's ready to go. We'll have to do this to the pressure plate as well. Right now I'm screwing all the flywheel bolts into the crank, and I'm just making sure that they all bottom out without any issues. Because since we're using a flywheel spacer and custom bolts, I want to make sure that everything lines up before I go ahead and put red Loctite on here. I've now verified these bolts fit perfectly, and they bottom out on the flywheel before the threads bottom out on the crank, which is a very important thing to check. But the next step is going to be taking them out one at a time and installing the thread locker. And when I reinstall them, I'm going to torque them all to the same spec, which is around 20. And I say 20 because when you torque something like this, it has to be in a sequence. So say for example, the torque spec is 100, you're gonna do like 20, then 60, then 100, or 20, 80, 100, or just follow the specified torque specs and torque sequence. But in this case, the torque spec for these is 75, which I feel like is pretty low, but it makes sense because these bolts are longer, which actually causes more stress on the bolt itself if it is tighter, because it is being pulled apart. And that could cause a bolt to snap prematurely if it is tightened too much. Honestly, I might bump up the torque spec to around 80-ish. It's still kind of low, but I also don't want my bolts to snap off. I think OEM torque spec on these is around 100. I put red Loctite on each of the bolts, and now we are torquing them to 30 foot-pounds for the first pass. And I stopped the crank from spinning on the front by putting a 27mm socket on the harmonic balancer, and this is bottoming out to the hoist. So the crank will not be spinning, because if you've done this by yourself, you know it's very difficult to stop the flywheel from spinning. First pass is done. We're gonna crank up from 30 to about 50 to 60. Second pass done. Third pass, we're gonna crank it up to 80 as our final pass. And you know it's at 80 when it clicks. Boom, 80. If you've never used a torque wrench before, that's how you know how tight the bolt is. And another thing with tightening bolts, I like to do them in a sequence. For example, I'll start with this one, jump across to this one, here, 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 here. The goal is to make a star pattern so that the flywheel can be pressed on evenly. Because if you just do it around, it'll actually warp going on. And we don't want it to warp, so we're gonna continue the star pattern. At this point, the flywheel is 100% attached to the engine, torque to spec. The very next step on the directions is to mount the clutch disc to the alignment tool and test fit it onto the flywheel and verify that the springs, these are the springs, are not hitting those flywheel bolts on the inside. And I'm not hearing any metal to metal, so I think we're good. I'll take it off so you can see how far these bolts come out. I'm gonna leave myself a little note on the inside just because if we're ever in this position again, you're gonna want something to cheer you up. Also, you can't forget to write your torque lines. This is what they do in performance shops. You kind of leave a line on the outside along the washer and on the bolt. This is how you will know if the bolt was spinning off, if the torque spec was incorrect, or if the bolt failed. "22 foot-pounds. And just like before, we tighten it down in a star sequence, and now I am drawing my torque lines on the bolts. The very next step in the directions say that we need to clearance the transmission for the starter. There's a nice little template here. And what this describes is this outline here. It's bright enough that it'll shine through. These bolt locations are lined up, and you can see I need to shave off about 4 to 5 millimeters here. All right, we've grinded this nice notch out of here. It's nice and smoothed out. Got a little bit more clearance. Let's test fit this starter and see how it fits. And another thing I realized I did not notice before, it looks like this upper hole is stripped out, which is really not good. It's actually pretty common to happen on 300ZXs, I've heard. So eventually I'm gonna have to bore this out and drill a bigger hole so I can make another thread. But that sounds like a problem for another day, especially because I don't have my tap and die set here. But for now, let's just make sure this works. The starter is fully mounted, tightened into position. You can see the teeth on the inside here now. So the best way to pry back the teeth to see if it'll fit is just pull down. In its most maxed out state, it is not even coming close to the trans anymore. I think it definitely would have hit this if I didn't trim this off. The next step is test fitting dowel pins. So we need to put dowel pins in here and one in here. And then after those dowel pins are in, all we have to do is put the transmission onto the engine. Oh, that's so exciting. It is very strange seeing a starter bolted to a transmission like this. Most cars, if not all cars I've worked on, the starter bolts to the engine, just like the KA here. Goes in here. I don't know, this is just really weird. Before I forget, I definitely want to change out this throwout bearing. And while we have this out, we might as well grease all of our pivot points. I have wiped off all of our grease points. They're all nice and clean. But unfortunately, I think this throwout bearing is different from this one. So I'm gonna have to reuse this one. Luckily, it's not bad. I thought it was at first, just because it looks rusty. But it's not making any noise. It's nice and stiff. There's no play. So I am confident that this will work. Anything that's shiny, grease it on up. Smooth. About a half hour to an hour later, we finally wiggled this thing on. It was not being cooperative with us, but we got it. We got it. So a couple takeaways from this whole thing. We did not need to grind off that crank spacer. We just needed to pull it out. And this kit was honestly not too hard to install. I'm looking forward to the next video where we'll be able to drop it into the car and then figure out the wiring situation. Because I'm not going to be using a custom harness, I'm going to be making my own. Today we were at Tuner Galleria and Nate just set up a new 300ZX body. Now I have my old Supra. But this is our very first RC drift event, and we actually only came for the drift event. We'll probably walk around and look at some of the cars later. I just think it's funny we came to a car show just to RC drift because there's this super cool track. And we also have Nate with Coil Red. He's setting up some camera gear right now. What's up,
Got
Nate?
a lot of gear to set up, but it's gonna be super wild.
He's really good with filming cars and drifting and everything related to cars, basically. I'll be sure to attach his channel so you guys can check out his take on everything, but he's probably gonna send me some clips that we can use in the video. Let's see how we do. Again, this is my very first event, so don't roast me if I spin out too much. This thing looks so good. man wants all the smoke.
Give me the top spot.
What do you think, Nate? How's it driving?
It's so slick, but it's so fun.
Isn't this a super cool course?
Oh yeah. Whoever set it up did a good job.
That's true. So I've been driving for a few laps and I kept spinning out a lot, but luckily we have a good friend, Cleveland, here.
Nice to see you guys.
He's been RC drifting for how long now?
2 years.
2 years. I would have guessed like 10 years. He's helping me do an alignment real quick and trying to dial in some of the front suspension here, trying to maximize the angle and making sure everything's good to go. These are the two chassis that he's running right now.
This one is an MST RMX. It's got every option part possible. It's got really good dampers. It steers very, very well.
Oh yeah. It's like 90 degrees.
And this has got my Salady on it.
Hey, that's so cool.
And this is a Rhinomax V2 that has a JZX90 on it.
On VSKFs. Sick. Hell yeah, man. Good stuff.